David Steiner. I want to welcome everyone here this morning. It's a very busy morning across town with no less than 25 graduations and 150 ceremonies and breakfasts. So those of you who could show up today, we appreciate it, and there's still more trickling in. 5 Towns Marriage Initiative is doing this particular series today, this program in conjunction with Mesila. We have with us today the founder of Mesila, Shalom Bayis. If stand up for a second just to acknowledge who he is here. I cannot thank him and his staff, wonderful staff, enough, and those coming to lecture along with him from Lakewood, both Rabbi Nehemiah Pansky and also Shalom Bayis for coming to help us with the workshops. In addition, we have David Mark, certified, only from certified government therapist in the universe, apparently, which is very, very exciting, to talk to us about the issues of finances and Shalom Bayis. Our organization has been founded on the principle that as a group of just regular folks, we were trying to think about way back when, maybe in 2010, a little before even, within the Far Rockaway community, seeing a lot of what was going on with the seemingly rising divorce rate throughout the community. What could an average person do to help out? And honestly, almost all of our efforts have sort of stemmed from that concept through the direction of Rabbanim, steering committees, to some extent the Vada of the 5 towns, and many local Rabbanim. We have tried to address very basic issues, and many of the points we were told to try to emphasize were trying to just spread the concepts of Torah, Divrei Torah, and the various aspects of simplistic approaches we could all learn from and learn about regarding various challenges that come about through Shalom Bayis. The issue of addressing the financial aspects truly goes back to around Hurricane Sandy time, and possibly even before, but certainly around that time, and we had discussed even then working together initially with Achiezer and other groups to put together a program much like today. It took a while, and actually, frankly, meeting Shmuley to really help us understand the resources that Mesila already largely had in place, but also I understand Achiezer's been involved with. We want to thank very much our keynote speakers that we're about to introduce, both Mr. Morris Smith, who I approached very early on, a number of years back, but never followed up with regarding this concept, and he had been working in this field for some time of helping others with simple tools to try to work on financial management. And Dr. Pelcovitz, certainly, who has been the star from community and trying to work on all of the sort of psychosocial aspects from young to elderly regarding how to cope with ongoing daily situations. The concept here today, I think, is going to be wonderful, but also extremely simple, and at the same time, I think, there's the rub that, one of the people who had responded to one of our advertisements and had called in for some of the services we offer, which I should just briefly go through. What do we do right now? So currently, in addition to offering citywide programs across this community and beyond, we are certainly very interested in education. Beyond education, however, we run a Shalom Bayis hotline that is directed at largely not being the answer for Shalom Bayis, but directing people. Again, a surprisingly large number of calls involve simply a chizuk for those people calling, direction to therapists, but directions also to shirim, directions to local Rabbanim who can help. It's surprising how many people simply need a helping hand. We're working together now to possibly create a mentoring program in the community to try to help others direct toward using available resources that are here, and those who have been married, who are able to give hadracha, direction to others in the community who are not married as long or not married as solidly. Again, problems with marriage arise from 1 week of marriage to 25 years of marriage. And working on issues of Shalom Bayis is, the Lord's work, as they say. And a lot of times people just need a big helping hand. It's surprising how much people realize, even with monetary issues, how much the fact that other people are going through similar things. Somebody, remember a very, very interesting line in business somebody said, and the concept is that if you're not going through basic tzaras on a day-to-day basis, you're not running a business. And I think to some extent one could probably say, if you have a family and you don't have day-to-day tzaras with at least monetary issues and everything else, are you really running a family? Are you really there? I think to some extent, proof of life is showing up and discovering that there's tsar, there's difficulty, not necessarily just a curse, but the reality is that we're in this world to grow. Guaranteed one thing, and that's every challenge, every situation that comes before us represents a tremendous opportunity. So again, we thank all of the speakers for this morning and today. Additionally, I forgot to mention a couple other things. So we do also offer a call-in Shalom Bayis hotline that is being renewed daily. Some very exciting shirim in the 2 to 5 minute variety from various Magidei Shir throughout Eretz Israel, largely from the Mir. We also have weekly newsletters that we put out in the community and for shuls and for wider distribution. Working right now on putting together a website. And I should also mention, especially with David Mark being one of our speakers, that we're also planning to have over this summer, some more focused workshops that David Mark will be leading specifically for more one-on-one approach with couples in need. So we look forward to trying to put together all we can to host and provide any kind of needs for couples and families. Last but not least, with respect to referrals for local therapists, we hope that we can always provide those in need with referrals to the therapists in the area that are needed, that are available, and where funding is necessary or people are having difficulty seeing those therapists due to the extreme costs at times, we are there to try to bridge that gap financially in any which way, shape we can. So let us be a resource for that. I have more to say, but I'm stopping. So without further ado, let's begin. We will begin with, if you see in front, we did post a schedule of the day. We're going to try to pull this together hopefully as late as 12:30 with a Q&A at the very end here, and we're taping things as well, audio and video, to provide everyone afterwards with the chance to see this, those who can attend. We'll begin again with an address from Dr. Morris Smith, and after this we will talk with Rabbi Dr. David Pelcovitz as well. All right, good morning everyone, and I would like to introduce Morris Smith. Thank you so much, Mr. Smith, for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you very, very much for the opportunity, Dr. Steiner. It's great to be here this morning, and hopefully I'll be able to share for some of my own experiences, hopefully in a way that I'll be able to help couples in the future as far as managing through various challenges which they may face through their years together, and able to implement certain strategies that will help them overcome different financial challenges that occur for people. I think, as mentioned, almost all couples have different stresses along the way. So what I'd like to talk to you about, I'll set up maybe an outline. I'll give you a couple minutes of background for myself, how I kind of got here today. The second thing I'd like to discuss is maybe what I would call developing a mission statement. However, we should have somewhat of a mission statement in their life as far as what they're trying to accomplish financially, and try to implement a plan afterwards to ensure success of that mission statement. The third point I'd like to discuss are some of the challenges that are faced today by couples in the Jewish community, specifically in the Orthodox Jewish community today, as far as trying to make basic ends meet. The fourth point will be related to, I guess, the tools that are available to be successful, hopefully, in this environment. And finally, maybe a couple of closing remarks. So first of all, just my background. I grew up in the New York City area, and my undergraduate degree was as a CPA. I have in accounting and economics, and I have a CPA from the state of New York. I ended up going into the money management business afterwards. I worked at Fidelity for 10 years, and basically been involved as a private investor since that time period. My orientation is very much towards the public markets and much more towards equities. However, in addition to that, I served on a number of boards over the years, boards of profits and for not-for-profit organizations, and have had a lot of exposure to how those businesses tend to run. And in addition to that, I myself am a president of something called Torah Conferencing Network, where we produce shiurim that are broadcast worldwide, and I'm basically responsible for all the finances there, besides marketing, etc., and get a chance to actually run a business on a smaller scale. And as mentioned beforehand, I am involved locally with both Mesila and with Achiezer. Specifically with Mesila, Shmuley Margolis, who was here, as was mentioned before. It's an organization that was formed, I guess, more than 20 years ago. Shmuley and I met, I believe, sometime in the 1990s, when Mesila was still in his younger years in Eretz Yisrael, when we were living there. And I think he has performed an incredible service for Klal Yisrael and people. I would call him one of those unsung heroes that people just do not know, and he has changed so many families' lives. And not only has he changed families and businesses' lives today, but the educational programs that Mesila does throughout the world are going to change many, many future lives. There will be doros that will have changed because of the education, basic financial literacy programs that are taught by Mesila throughout the world. And he really deserves all of our accolades for what he has done for Klal Yisrael over this time period. So Shmuley himself was, I think, to some degree, a large impetus towards the work that we have done here locally in Achiezer. I serve as one of the 8 financial consultants at Achiezer, and we try to implement a Mesila-like program at our offices here. And we have seen over the last few years over 100 couples that we have done financial counseling services with over that time period. And the feedback loop that we get is quite positive. And in Yetz Hashem, we'll be able to grow our own resources. We use the Mesila approach as much as possible. We make sometimes adaptations for what we have here locally, but I think most of the people who come through our door are happy to have had the interactions with us, and that's one of the points I think that we'll try to stress today, that there are financial counselors out there to help couples to manage through the ideas of budgeting and how to implement plans to be successful and being able to keep a strong financial household along the way. Anyway, so now to go on to the question of a mission statement. What do I mean by a mission statement? So most great corporations, and I think almost every organization, whether that's a shul or that's or it should be a school, etc., should always have a mission statement to understand what they are trying to accomplish in the organization that they have formed. And that's no different even within a household. You have a certain mission statement of what you're trying to do. When you try to build a Bayis Ne'eman Israel, what are you trying to accomplish with that? So within that framework and raising children, etc., there should always also be somewhat of a statement that relates to what you're trying to accomplish financially. And that can be different goals at different stages of your life. So for example, there may be a time in life where your goal in life is to save enough money to purchase a home, to get that down payment. There may be another time in life where your goal in life is to get completely out of debt. Or a third time, there may be where you have the constant day-to-day pressure of bills, somewhat akin to debt, where you have to pay bills and you can't seem to get ahead of yourself. And then there could be a more general goal of financial independence where you're not reliant on other sources to be able to make ends meet. So I sort of crafted here a mission statement, which I think is somewhat generic, but I think could be applied to every family and needs to be implemented in a way where you make the adjustment for yourself at the time of your life that you're at, and have that statement as an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish as a goal. And I wrote the following statement: to be able to create a stable household environment where both the husband and wife or the individuals can have true Shalom Bayis or Menuchas HaNefesh relative to the areas of financial management. And I think as financial counselors, that's what we're trying to help all the couples that we see. That would be a good description of the goal that Mesila has, Achiezer, or any of these organizations. If we can accomplish that, I think we've been able to accomplish the goals that we have as counselors. So let's talk for a few minutes about the challenges that the Jewish couples have today. Frankly, they are enormous. Even though on the one hand, we have today the opportunities to have higher income levels than we ever had before, the expenses that we face within the community are truly staggering. And even when I look over our married life of 36 years, I cannot believe how much more difficult it is for younger couples today just to make ends meet. And I have 3 married children, and I think the number one issue that they always discuss relates to the tuition crisis, etc., the high cost of living, the cost of buying a house. And these issues have become incredibly complicated today. For example, you're living here in Bayswater, you go through the entire 5 towns area, the prices of homes in general, especially in Jewish Orthodox communities, have really gone through the roof. And this is not just the last 5 years, it's really the last 20 or 30 years, because there tends to be, thank God, we have been very successful in growing our community. The growth rate within the frum community is whether it's 3 or 4% or 5%, some people say, per year, but that puts a tremendous amount of stress on buying homes in an area nearby where there's a good shul, a good rav, a community that you want to attach to, and where there's good schools. So therefore, you get into local bidding wars to buy half-decent houses everywhere. And this is a pressure that it exists in all forms of orthodoxy. Doesn't mean you're left wing, middle wing, right wing. It doesn't make a difference. The prices of housing are incredibly expensive, and it's an issue that every new young married couple faces. The second issue is tuition costs. Every person speaks about the issue of tuition costs, and by the way, it's a two-way street. I'm very active with a number of the local schools. I'm very aware of some of their finances, and it is a constant struggle at every yeshiva here locally, and this is a relatively well-to-do community. It is a struggle for every yeshiva to make ends meet. All of them are trying to juggle. All of them have to take short-term loans, long-term loans, etc. The pressures are enormous. And I want to first address their end, and then I'll go back to the obvious end that you're all relating to, is your tuition bill. On their end, they have the following stresses. You have parents who are always asking for smaller class sizes, more individual attention. The school is too big. All those types of issues come up. They all want special programs added onto the general curriculum of what's being asked from them. These all cost a lot of money. Most of the schools, their salary expense will run close to 80% of the overall cost, and there are no easy way to make massive cuts in salaries. I think most of us know that rebbeim and teachers in yeshivas are not overpaid. You can argue back and forth the fact that they don't have to work 300 and X amount of days a year, but nobody really wants to. On the other hand, they have a very difficult job during the year when they're teaching, and they have tremendous responsibility to all of our children. And again, they are not paid a tremendous amount of money. I know what salaries are throughout the neighborhood. So you have, and again, if you're going to have smaller classrooms, and it's just going to again, it's just not as efficient vis-a-vis a situation where you have much larger classrooms. And again, there's the trade-off of the quality of education versus what you're willing to pay for that. And something always has to give. It's not as if you could find money just flying down and you'll be able to solve the problems. And I will speak maybe 1 minute about that issue specifically. There is initiatives that are around to try to get more outside funding for yeshivas. For example, there's a bill that's still being debated at the state, should be decided in the next day or two, related to tuition tax credits. All these initiatives that are being done at the state, and if there are federal level programming, it's so important for all of us as a community to come out to support, because these are monies that do not have to come directly from the community for people to be able to alleviate to some degree the tuition crisis. It's such an important take-home message for everyone to tell your neighbors about. Contact your legislators, do whatever you can to try to get bills like this passed, not just in New York State, frankly, throughout the country. But anyway, going back to the situation within the schools. Now, as a tuition payer, which most of you are, you have the situation where you're paying the median maybe $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year, depending where your kid is in school. Could be higher, $25,000 if they're in high school already, depending where the yeshivas are. Those are staggering amounts of money to pay in tuition. Those are after-tax dollars. When I use the term after-tax dollars, it means there's no credit for income. Your income gets taxed, and then you take that after-tax money, and that's what you have to pay tuition. And if you just have a family of 4 or 5 children, which is norm, if I can use that expression, your tuition bills are staggering. So now we've taken A, the situation of housing, B, the situation of tuitions. Then you have all the other expenses of life. For example, now is camp time. Are the kids going away? Are the kids local? Even if you stay local, camp costs a lot of money, a couple $1,000s for the summer, whatever it may be, and you have to find things to do for your children. It is really a difficult issue. In addition, you have emergencies that everybody happens to them, and that's why it's so important to be able to save, because of the issue of emergencies that will occur. It's not as if they're pre-announced when an emergency is going to happen, but there always has to be a kitty around just in case they do occur. And when you add all of these situations together, what I like to use the expression of a burn rate. The average burn rate being what are your expenses on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or a yearly basis. It is a very, very high number within the firm community, and there is no easy solution to getting those numbers down. We can argue, again, the tuition, I am telling you, the tuition situation is not going to quote unquote be solved unless there's a massive change in the way states fund yeshivas. As far as housing goes, we all know what you can always try to do in housing is to go to new communities, move out of town, etc. But there's always the trade-off of that. Are you going to a new community? Is there an infrastructure around? These are not easy decisions for people to make. So those are the difficulties and challenges. And the question is, how do you meet those challenges in being able to build a financially stable household? So it's interesting, you need this sort of, I would call, balance between bitachon and hishtadlus. Now, we all have to have bitachon. At the end of the day, Akash Baruch Hu will be there for us, and we know He's always there for us. It's not a question of that. But at the same time, we have to make hishtadlus to do whatever we can on our part to make ends meet, and we have to do that in a financially responsible way. In the investment business, I have a friend of mine from Lakewood. He once coined a great term to me. As far as managing money, he goes, the strategy of tzipita liyeshua, right, of yearning for Yeshua does not work in the investment management business. You have to work very, very hard to try to find good stocks and to be successful. I think the same thing goes for financial management in general in your house. To be tzipita liyeshua, to hope that, some windfall will come, you'll win the lottery, is not a strategy for success. And the hishtadlus you have to do is what you're doing, as far as managing your expenses and as far as trying to enhance your revenue in your household. So let me go through some strategies I think can help people hopefully get to that magical point where you reach financial independence and going forward. First of all, as a preamble to this, I think the most important factor that I can talk about is that both spouses have to be on the same page. Whenever we meet, for example, whenever we meet Achiezer, we will not go into a meeting if there's not both spouses there, because it is useless to talk to one spouse about how to try to manage a household in a financially responsible way if the other spouse is not there. And frankly, even if they're there, but they're not there psychologically, I find that the times that we're the least successful is that when one spouse is really engaged in the process, but the other one is not. That is just a recipe for failure. Both spouses have to truly want to believe in the Mesila/Achiezer process that you can obtain financial independence, and that will require a responsible financial budgeting process. So once you've overcome, hopefully, that factor, then the following strategies, I think, are very, very important in trying to get your household in order. First of all, just on a very basic level, none of you have to have CPAs, but I'll try to be as basic as possible. We all have what's called a balance sheet, and we all have what's called an income statement. That's true of every business, that's true of everybody in life. What does a balance sheet mean? Balance sheet means you have certain assets and certain liabilities. Typically, most households' largest asset will be their house. They'll bought a home, will hopefully have some equity in that house, and as you pay down your mortgage, that equity builds. In addition, you hopefully have some savings. That could be cash, and that cash could be invested in different areas of your life. Then you have what's called liabilities. And liabilities tends to be debt that you have to pay out. And that could be your weekly bill, at Seasons or any other, local food place that you may have. It could be really anything that you have on a weekly or monthly or a quarterly basis. It could be your insurance bills. It could be bills related to your auto leasing payments, so on and so on, and obviously your mortgage, etc. Now, the mortgage I like to keep differently. Why? Because mortgage really is long-term debt, because you have two sorts of debt typically in your life. You'll have short-term debt, and you can have long-term debt. Long-term debt is a mortgage. A mortgage you pay off typically over 25 and 30 years. You pay a certain amount every month. You have a clear idea of what that is. Shorter-term debt, however, will be the normal bills that you owe to stores, but also I would use a better term I think to be used is credit cards. Most people use credit cards to sort of manage their finances. Credit cards could be a phenomenal thing, and credit cards could be the bane to your existence. Credit cards are great because they can make your life much more organized. If you pay your bills on time, it's a phenomenal way to get a credit line for 20 days a month that you don't have to worry about, and you pay your bill on time, and it's great. You're organized, you know all your expenses, etc. However, credit cards are the worst thing in life if you ever have to borrow with your credit credit card, because the cost of credit cards are absolutely staggering. Typically, the APRs are 20, 25% on these credit cards. You may get off for the first few months or for the first year, but after a while, the costs go crazy. And if you don't end up paying off that credit card bill, your debt starts to spiral out of control. So anyway, that's your balance sheet. And it's very important. We try to tell people when they come in, when we do these financial advisory sessions, we always want to know exactly what are your debts. People tend to be reluctant to tell us, oh, well, it usually will be about 45 minutes into the conversation, you'll find out, oh, they happen to have an auto leasing debt that they have to pay every month, and this, and so on and so forth. So we want to make sure they give us all the debts that they have and list them up front so we know exactly with what situation we're dealing with. Okay. So then you figured out at this point, you have your balance sheet, and then you want to go on to the income statement. The income statement is basically what you're able to generate as revenue each month and what you have as expenses each month. And the revenues typically will consist of your job. That'll probably be the largest source. There may be savings. You may be getting help from government programs. You may be getting help from parents, etc., from grandparents. We're not sure. You may have children who work, and that'll be part of the revenue of the house. So that's the revenue pool. And the expense pool, as you can imagine, are all the expenses that you have on a daily, monthly basis, as we discussed. Those expenses are quite wide-ranging. They include things as food, clothing, utilities, the tuition that we discussed before, housing costs, whether those are mortgages or rentals, etc. And that's your basic income statement. And every month, if in an ideal world, everybody would look at their income statement and say, we generated X amount of dollars in revenue and we had X amount of dollars in expenses, and God willing, you would hope that the revenues exceeded the expenses and you would be able to save some money on a monthly basis. You would love that to happen. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen often enough. And the question is, how do you deal with that problem when you see that you're running cash flow negative? Again, cash flow negative means that your revenues are not covering your expenses on a monthly basis. And when I use the word expenses, I just want to reiterate something I said earlier. Expenses are what your burn rate is. That's your monthly expenses. So how do you deal with that problem? So first, I want to work on the expense side with some suggestions, and then I want to work on the revenue side with some suggestions. On the expense side, so what we always try to do, and Mesila has been doing this forever, and they've been great in sharing some of their documentation with organizations, etc. The key to success is to have a budget. In other words, you would be shocked by how many people do not know what they are spending monthly. They have no idea. And we see this all the time when you sit down with a couple, and first they have no idea, and even when you sit down, even when they come in with the list, and then you start talking to them, things that they don't have on their list, they suddenly remember what's that, oh yeah, we forgot about this, or we forgot about that. So again, and today with computer tools, it's so easy with these different programs, whether it's Quicken, etc., to set up our Excel spreadsheet, just to set up a very basic spreadsheet that any expense that you incur during a month, you have it inputted onto the spreadsheet. And at a minimum, you will understand at the end of the month exactly what your costs are, because most couples have absolutely no idea what it is. So once we've accomplished that step, if we do, because quite often couples do not, I would say sometimes maybe as much as 50% of the couples get stuck on this point. They can't do a budget. They can't sit down with the discipline. And we offer to help them. We have some great advisors at this, over here in Akiyeza who really will walk you through the process of understanding how to do this. It sounds overwhelming, but if you're organized, you can really do it. It's not as difficult as it really sounds. You're just making sure that everything you're doing is documented. Any company that runs in any sort of fashion documents every expense that it does. So all we're saying is port from the business world what's done as far as expenses into your personal life and have a full understanding. So you obviously, credit cards are easy to follow because if you look at your bill, you know exactly what you spent your money for. You're getting a set of bills every month, and you can look at those and see what you spend for. If you've written checks, you just have to go through your check register, and then you have to monitor the cash, which obviously is the most difficult thing, because when you give cash to somebody, well, how do you remember what you gave to that person? So you have to make notes for yourself. Again, everybody today carries around some sort of, whether it's a smartphone or something, or even it's a piece of paper, just keep notes as best you can, just to have an understanding of what those expenses are. Now, once we have the budget in place, once we have the budget and they are trying to implement and write down exactly what their expenses are on a monthly basis, then there is a lot to work with. Why do I say that? Because when you work with people and you go through each of the items, you can quite often find areas that you can save that you've never ever thought about, or you never realized, on the other hand, things that you were spending on that you didn't realize how much this was costing you. And this is sometimes it's so mundane, let me take one step back. We never preach to people what to do. We can only give suggestions. We will never tell anyone what to do because we're not here to be dictators. But what we can do is at least make people aware of this is where your expenses are. So for example, it's amazing. I remember having a couple, this goes back a number of years ago, and they were having issues trying to make ends meet. And it turned out this person had a certain thing, he really liked to get a certain type of coffee and go to a certain place, a couple times a week. We looked at the expense of that. It was like a couple $1,000s over the year. It was literally what they needed to fill their gap. And he was able, and again, I think he was able to make the adjustment maybe psychologically. Okay, I'll go to that place half the time that I'm doing it now, and I've only cut my coffee expense in half. There are so many expenses when you look at them individually that can really be managed in a tighter basis. And that could include things as, where am I shopping for this? How can I do better? Am I taking advantage of all the different sales? Like when I look at food. So for example, certain places are always good to buy because you could buy off the sales. And if you have the time to manage that, you can actually save money on a constant basis. As we all know, supermarkets have loss leaders they advertise on a constant basis. And if you're cherry picking supermarkets, that's one way to do it. However, other people like to use the Costco approach, where everyday lower prices, or the Walmart approach. If you look through all those items, you can figure that out. And it could be things like cleaner bills. There's so many different areas. If you look at each bill and try to find out where could there be a lower cost solution or a more effective solution, there are ways to save money almost on every line item. There may be programs, for example, with utilities. If you're at lower income levels, they have special programs for people who have lower income levels. So you can contact the utilities and work with them in those areas. When it comes to areas of healthcare insurance, which is a major factor for everyone, so there are various different organizations that help people get health care insurance and try to get the most cost-effective program available. We do that specifically at Achiez, and we have a whole individual there who works just on the area of health care insurance. It's such an important factor for so many people. There's expenses that are discretionary, and there are expenses that are necessary. That is such an important problem. Many people have expenses they think are absolutely necessary, they're essential, and they're not. They're discretionary. And what you have to do is look at those expenses and say, do I really need to spend this on this? And however, you may be able to do that 5 years from now, but you may be at a point in your life where you have all these tuition bills and stuff that you have to say to yourself, I have to push this off, I have to put it for another day. And if you understand that you're dealing with where you're trying to have some financial solvency, those decisions can really get you over the top to reach those types of points. So those are the aspects of the expenses. Then I want to talk about, I think, the underrated part here, which is revenues. Everybody has a job, you're working, you're trying to get a better job, so on and so forth. But there's sometimes so many better ways where you can try to advance yourself when it comes to revenue generating. So for example, you have to look within your household and the dynamics of your household. So is there one spouse working? Is there two spouses working? Does it make sense for both spouses to be working? What are your child care costs relative to your other spouse working? Have to do the P&L, the pluses and minuses relating to those situations. If your spouse or yourself are you working in positions that you're able to maximize your income? Or if you added certain skill sets, could your income be increased significantly? People always underestimate that if you go back and sometimes take a couple other courses, you may be able to do a job that will pay a lot more than the job you're doing right now. So the more you can enhance your skills, the better it is. This is really a bigger picture question because that frankly goes back, I think, to the importance of education and the fact that you want to be as prepared as possible when you go out to the workforce to have skill sets that are in demand. And if you have the proper training for that through going through schooling, hopefully you'll be able to get better paying jobs. In addition to that, quite often people do have the capabilities of sometimes taking a second job. And we have found this quite often. I think Mesila has found this, and I know we have found this at Achiezer, that sometimes you could take a second job. It could be a security guard. I mean, everyone's got today's security guards, things all over the place. It could be helping out in a grocery. It could be helping out doing homework for kids or shadowing, depending on what age you are. There are so many things that there are needs in the community. And sometimes if you do that in the evening a couple times a week or on a Sunday, you may be able to supplement your income by $100, $200 a week. That may be all you needed to make ends meet. And that's true of either spouse. So you have to be creative and think about ways that you can do that. And in the new economy, the new internet-based economy, there are so many new ways that people are generating income today that did not exist before. The whole phenomenon about Uber, Uber being these private cab services, people are making money. Basically, they're going to destroy, if they're successful, the medallion cab industry, because in a sense we have privatized cabs, and people love Uber. I have never used it. People love using this. Uber is when you kind of order a cab, you do it on your iPhone, etc., and they show up, and they give a nice car, and it kind of works out good. It's a better price, I think, than the cabbie. So those types of supplement. There was last week, Amazon announced something incredible, that they're looking to get people to directly deliver packages instead of using FedEx. They'll probably bring to some sort of central delivery point, and you'll do the delivery instead of Federal Express. And they're going to save a lot. I guarantee, if Amazon's doing it, they're not doing it because this is thought out financially. So you'll be able to do this job for them. You'll deliver the packages. FedEx won't be doing it at a huge markup, and you have another source of income. All these ways, if you can maximize those free hours of your life and try to generate more income, that could literally get you over the top to making ends meet. In addition, a couple of other things, that you should try to take advantage as much as possible for government programs that are available. There are literally lists of these programs that are available. Achiezer has a list that I think we share if you come into us, if you've gone through this process, and you can contact other agencies that there's available to get. If you're in a situation where you need government help, go ahead and do it. You're trying your best, and there's no reason not to take that help. We all pay taxes so that people should be helped when they need them, and you're eligible for these programs and take advantage. And finally, one thing that the community does phenomenally well is gemachs. We all run gemachs here of all different types. They're run here, and they're run throughout all the neighborhoods, both here and Eretz Israel. It is incredible you can get off gemach. And when you have, for example, simchas to make, etc., what you can leverage off gemachim today is phenomenal. People are so nice in giving over their clothes and different party goods, whatever it could be, into these gemachim and utilize it. It's one less expense that you have to worry about in your life. Okay, so we've kind of, I think, went through many of these different factors here. I'd just like maybe to close with a couple of comments. I think when you hear a presentation like this, it sounds overwhelming. And if I was sitting in your seat, in your chair, I would also be overwhelmed. I'd be saying to myself, gosh, how am I ever going to do this? How am I going to get started? The only way to get started is two ways. First of all, come into an Achiezer Mesila office anywhere in the world and say, I need help. I want to be able to get my financial house in order. Or the other thing is, you can do it yourself. You don't have to even start. If you're a self-starter, you can literally go online. These financial budgeting tools, quote unquote, exist to some degree already. You can pull them off the internet and you say, I'm going to start to do this, because I'm telling you, there's nothing more psychologically that, and Dr. Pelcovitz will speak about this much better than I can, but to get free and to get out of debt and to get out of credit card debt is the most incredible feeling. I've had couples over the years tell me, and sometimes it requires them to do something dramatic, to sell a house, to move to another neighborhood, but they tell me afterwards, it's like, I got my life back. Debt can take your life away from you, and especially when it's overwhelming debt. And when you can kind of get your financial household under control, I truly feel that at that point, the issues of Shalom Bayis, Menuchas, and Nefesh, those can all be alleviated to a great degree, and hopefully everybody should be successful in doing this. Thank you very much.
All right, so we want to very much thank Mr. Smith for his amazing presentation, truly eye-opening. I just want to do a fast plug also. One of the things I was doing to get ready for this event is I happened to finally read through a book that I realized I originally purchased and then was zeicher to have given me again by Rabbi Carmel from Mesila, which was this Your Money in Your Life, is that the name of the book, which is, I think, originally based on a number of articles in Hamodia, am I saying that right? Magazine that they had put together, and I'm not sure to what extent the organization and those articles work together, but certainly the book was extremely eye-opening for even a seasoned veteran as myself. I'm a physician, I have a business as a physician, and I can tell you that whether or not you see it, I'm ready for the Mesila in business volume, because I was saying, why aren't we doing this in my business? Some of the very simple questions about budgeting, one of the questions I think that the Mesila people say very often, and it's a great thing, is when you talk to somebody and they say, wow, we can't make it. We're having so many problems making it. Go, okay, good, what's your shortfall? I don't know. Really? You don't know? No, I just, we're short something. But I'm sure if you had $10,000 more a month, would that make a difference? Yeah, that would be good. The problem we run into, and I think this is a great point that the book also brings out, and we talked about, even touched on here, is that, the problem is that if you're not budgeting, if you're not watching how you're spending, if you're not using the tools that the Rebbeinu gave us and they're out here, there's no amount of money that's going to be enough. You can't live off $50,000 a year, you can't live off $100,000 a year, and you can't live off $300,000 a year. And the flip side is that, yeah, you can live off $80,000 a year. You can. And then Mr. Smith was alluding to this. It might not be easy, but it's possible. It may not be pleasant, but it's possible. And the exhilarating feeling of being free of debt, this world was given to us to have and be free. Baruch Hashem, that's an opportunity. I would be remiss not to throw past at least one short of our Torah overall on the subject. And I happened to see Rabbi Twersky just the other day, who was talking about the concept, as we're about to now talk about the psychological aspect of what involves Shalom Bayis and money. Money is really one of the reasons we definitely needed to speak on this subject at some point is, we're making the rounds, so to speak, on the hot topics within Shalom Bayis that are the push buttons for various types of conflict. In truth, there's one common theme of all this, and that's discord, and discord has to be managed in a uniform way, but I think that there's also, we could all admit, certain nuances to the various types of approach. One thing Rabbi Twersky brings out, Rabbi Dr. Twersky, in one of his little forum I was reading, is that one concept that he liked is he said somebody was telling him that he was constantly arguing with his spouse, could be a male or female, was a male with his wife at the time, and he said, I realized something at one point in time. I realized that in order for me to make my point and yell and scream and win an argument, that means that when I'm done winning my argument, that my other opponent, my spouse, lost the argument. And that means that if I continually win my arguments, that I'm married to somebody who's constantly losing arguments, and therefore they're losing, and they're a loser. And I don't want to be married to a loser. It's a very interesting thought, right? I mean, what is our point of discord? What is our point of always being right and trying to live by always proving ourselves? What do we exactly have to prove? My last little niche for myself, and this is also my little educational piece that I've gotten through the course of trying to learn from the millions of people we've been in touch with here, not quite millions, but something like that. I'd say two things that have come to the forefront again and again for me, and I think they're worth mentioning, and I'm not really quoting too many crazy things here. Shavisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. I always say, why is that in the Shulchan Aruch? Why it's come Musar for it? What is that doing in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch? And the truth is, I'll tell you what I keep saying again and again, is it belongs there, because you can't live life without remembering why we're here. That was another point actually I heard directly from Rabbi Twersky when I asked him some questions about what is it with marriage in our day. I was able to have an audience with him for about an hour in his home a little over a year ago and ask him some questions. And when asking that, he went through the Shepherd Brachas with me and he said, tell me exactly here where it talks about personal satisfaction, where it talks about getting things out of marriage for ourselves, or rather is it talking about living life for the Rebbeinu, about doing things that are going to make us closer to Hashem. One of the things that Baruch Hashem, Rav Margulies has been very inspirational for me in this regard. One of the things I thought about when I first started this organization was that not just to be bringing aspects of therapy and known science into the art of trying to help couples, but Torah true ideals. And the fact is, we have had science, and there's no denying wonderful things about science and medicine and psychological intervention, etc., psychiatry, psychology. But we've had a Torah for thousands upon thousands of years from Har Sinai, and Hashem is a pretty smart guy, right? So the truth is to think that we're going to somehow have one over with any bunch of Chachmas Chitzonius we have, as much as we need to apply it, there has to be an integration with Torah concepts. So again, Shavisi Hashem lenegdi tamid, not a bad thing to remember. I don't feel bad telling you guys to remember that one. Number two is I've also discovered that the biggest solution to any given problem is the problem is never the problem. It's always a matter of hachana. That the problem here is never going to be solved right here, generally ever. It's almost always here. You have to look back, in time and space, and when you put the effort at the right place, suddenly the problem solves itself. So I think this is a great example, again, where with a matter of integrating tools and working on things, it's a matter of knowing monetarily how to sort through things. It's a matter of psychologically how to approach things with derech eretz, with a number of things. And now we're going to be zeicha to hear from Dr. David Pelcovitz, noted author, scholar, lecturer, Rachel devotee for years, who can hopefully help shed some light for us, and not hopefully, definitely will shed some light for us here on some of the other aspects of helping us weave together the financial issues in Shalom Bayis. Thank you again for coming, everyone, and thank you, Rabbi Dr. Pelcovitz, for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Steiner, for organizing this. It's amazing that with your busy schedule and practice to be able to prioritize something that's almost never talked about. I don't remember another program like this focusing specifically on money. I'm sure it happens all the time, but it's so important and so rarely addressed. It's interesting, there was a doctoral dissertation done by a colleague of mine in the frum community in Baltimore, where he looked at a group of young couples who were married for a year, mostly I think in the Ner Yisrael community, and he asked them a bunch of questions about what their chassan and kala classes prepared them for, and what was their biggest surprise after a year of marriage. What did they wish they had more preparation for? And the number one, by far, the number one complaint about both the newly married chassanim and kalas was that there was virtually no time spent on financial planning, no time spent on what we're talking about here in their chassan and kala classes. That's something that's hopefully changing, but it just highlights why these kind of programs are so incredibly important. Let me spend the time that was allotted to me talking about a few areas. Obviously, I'm going to build on the wonderful practical talk of Morris Smith. What I'm going to say is more going to be the fluff part of it, the emotional part of it. But I think important also, though not as important as the nuts and bolts that we just heard about. I certainly learned a lot from hearing about it. So number one, I'm just going to talk briefly about the unique nature of fighting about money in terms of other marital conflict. We all know that part of life is it's virtually impossible for there to be a marriage where there isn't at times differences between husband and wife. In fact, it's not necessarily a bad thing at all. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the research about fights about money are very interesting because they find the following conclusions. Number one is compared to non-monetary issues, marital conflicts about money tend to be more pervasive, problematic, and recurrent. People tend to have the same fights over their marriage, more or less, and perhaps more ominously, it's often put off. So it's often avoided. So it has the danger of really building up unless you really do the kind of things that we're talking about this morning. So the other component of the research on the nature of fights in marriage over money is that more than any other kind of fight, it's associated with feelings of depression, outbursts of anger, and stonewalling. Some of you will be hearing from David Mark a little bit later about the danger of stonewalling in a marriage, that when you avoid talking about things, it's particularly ominous predictor of really serious marital conflict. So the necessity to at times take a step back and talk about these issues is incredibly important. A word about relative deprivation. So I think it's important to frame this before I move on to some specific recommendations. We all know that money is not necessarily what it seems. It's an incredibly complex kind of concept, and it's usually not about the money. Money in many families or in many individuals is often a stand-in for power, control, security, achievement, and even love, depending on how you grew up. So it's not about the money. And very often, and I'm sure many of you could relate to this, even if you suddenly find yourself in a position where you're making a lot more money, it rarely leads to sustained feelings of simcha. The money-happiness connection very clearly has much less to do with money. The research shows if you buy, let's say you've been wanting to buy an incredible home for much of your married life, and you finally find that home and buy it and manage to afford it, the feelings of happiness about the new home are surprisingly short-lived. Sure, you'll be happy, but it's more of a, sort of like a very passing kind of thing. You buy the new car you've been really dying for. Even though the ads for Lexus used to show the picture of the latest model Lexus and would say, whoever says money can't buy happiness isn't spending it right. But what does the research show happens to your happiness when you actually buy that great car? Again, at most you'll feel a little happier for, at most, 2-3 weeks, certainly not longer than a month. And what tends to happen is the more you make, the more you want to make. It's called the principle of relative deprivation. We tend to compare ourselves to others, and that's particularly problematic when you're living in a neighborhood where there are many people who may seem to have a lot more financially than we have. I'll just, before I move on to the practical steps, I'll just illustrate it with my favorite story about relative deprivation. There's a guy named Robert Frank. Robert Frank is an economist and a pretty wealthy guy. And he writes about an incredible experience that he had when he was younger. He was an idealistic guy, and he volunteers for the Peace Corps when he finishes college. So that's a place where idealistic people used to go and spend 2 years of just giving to others. It was 2 years of chesed. So he was assigned to be a teacher in Nepal. So the plane lands in Nepal. Some van picks him up, drives him on like some kind of 12-hour drive to the middle of nowhere in this dirt-poor part of Nepal. And they say, okay, we'll see you in 2 years. He's supposed to be a teacher there. And he's horrified because his living quarters for the next 2 years is going to be a one-room hut with no running water and no electricity. And he says to himself, I can't survive this. How am I going to survive this? Then he goes on to explain that he looked around him, and nobody in that part of Nepal was making any more, was living in anything other than a home with no running water and no electricity. So he was shocked that he got completely used to it in a matter of, he said it wasn't even weeks, in a matter of days. That became his new normal, and it was fine. But here's where the story gets interesting. He gets his first paycheck, and his first paycheck is for $40 a month. And now he's ready to quit. He's ready to come back to the United States. He says to himself, there's no way I could survive on $40 a month, even in this area. And he's about to hand in his resignation when he discovers that nobody in that region of Nepal is making any more than $30 a month. So he's making $40 a month, and everybody else is making $30 a month. So he's making $10 more than anybody in town. And he goes on to write that he never felt wealthier in his life than he did living in a one-room hut with no running water and no electricity with a $40 a month salary. It's a fascinating Musar Haskell. Right? The Shlomo Mel says, Oev kesef lo yispa kesef. It's an incredibly important way to think about this. Hard to live, because especially when we're surrounded by people who may have nicer homes or go on nicer vacations or don't seem to be having to struggle to make ends meet. But it's an important thing to think about psychologically. Here's the research on people who make money the center of their lives. Okay, the dangers of materialism. A lot of dangers to materialism. Okay, when you see money not as a tool, but you see money as sort of defining you. People who are like that, there are dozens of studies that clearly document that when money is the center of your life, you're going to be less satisfied with your life, you're going to want more money, you're going to be less apt to be a baltztaka, less apt to share, paradoxically, okay? Overall, you're not going to be well adjusted psychologically. You're going to be less happy even in your marriage and have lower levels of energy. Some of you may have heard about the affluenza studies where they find that in Scarsdale, New York, in Westchester County, they compared a couple of hundred kids who come from very wealthy families and compared them to kids from the other side of the tracks who come from families that were financially sort of low socioeconomic families. You know what they find? The researcher at Columbia who did this research was sure that she would find much privilege from having more money. She thought she'd find lower levels of problems than the rich kids. She thought she'd find more happiness levels than the rich kids. You know what she in fact found? Triple the rate of depression in the wealthy kids. Triple the rate of anxiety in the wealthy kids. A higher rate of alcohol and substance abuse in the wealthy kids. So she did a series of studies to deconstruct why, and in what she called affluenza, she found that it was tied to very often people whose values were shallow in the wealthy lives, who put too much emphasis on achievement, not enough on finding your unique spark, and not spending enough time one-on-one with the main currency of a healthy family, which is the k'mayim panim el panim of being together with each other. Okay, next section I wanted to talk about briefly before I get to very practical kinds of recommendations, hopefully on the emotional side, on conflict resolution in this area. And it's questions. This is the Cheshbon HaNefesh section. Questions to think about and ask yourself, okay? So here's some guiding questions in terms of getting underneath why money might be such a source of conflict in your life or a source of dissatisfaction. You have to understand what's that about. So here's a guiding set of questions, okay? So number one, it's based on the fact that the way people approach money is in large part related to how their parents treated money. What was it, Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal used to talk about parents not as mechanchem, but as mashpia. Mashpia meaning the Hebrew word for a ramp. We influence children and influence our family. It's ramped down unconsciously by showing what do we get emotional about? What do we care about? What do we model for ourselves and for our children? So here's the question just to think about. You could think about it and it may get you understanding a little bit the source of some of the conflict about money. Was money openly discussed in your household growing up? Did the father make all the decisions, or was it a team effort between husband and wife? Kids pick these things up, and in general, families work very differently with this. And as we've been hearing from the previous talk by Mara Smith, it ultimately has to be a team effort. Did you admire your parents' spending and saving habits? Or did you vow to do the opposite of what they did? I can't tell you how often I have people end up in my office who model themselves exactly on wanting to do the exact opposite of what they grew up with. So that they grew up in a home where there was tremendous financial pressure and constant fighting about money, okay? They will often throw themselves into the opposite of it, okay? And maybe be overly controlling about money in their marriage. And very often people try for the opposite but end up with the same issues just in a different key. What did you learn about money from watching other family members and friends? What does money mean to you now? What do you see its greatest value, its greatest dangers? And what attitude about money would you like to teach your children? Now, a lot of these questions are kind of common sense. But it might be very helpful as a couple to sit down quietly at some point, and we'll talk about the power of a planned discussion, to think about these questions. I don't mean just when you're early on in marriage, but to just think about how did the money atmosphere that you grew up with shape the way you are in your marriage today, the way you are as a parent today, and how you handle issues like budgeting and following the kinds of advice that we just heard. So that's one practical thing I wanted to talk about. Okay? And even if you don't feel comfortable talking about it with your spouse, talk about it with yourself. Because I think just the insight, when we have added insight, it could really make a difference. Next, I wanted to talk in general now for the remaining time allotted to me. I wanted to talk a little bit about managing expectations, because I think it's a very important point before we talk specifically about how to handle conflict about money. So, there's a beautiful Tiferes Yisrael in Yevamos on the meaning of the word Nesuin. So the Tiferes Yisrael says the following. He says, embedded in the word Nesuin, the Hebrew word for marriage, is a very deep lesson. He says marriage inevitably has conflict. And how we handle that conflict will either be a masa, the word masa, or a burden, is embedded in the word for marriage. Or, you know what else the word masa means? It means a nevuah, a song, something that lifts us up and is transcendent. And he says, it's up to you as a couple to figure out whether or not the inevitable conflict is going to be a source of growth or a burden. I think a very important point, because the conflict is inevitable. When it comes to money in particular, almost by definition, you're going to have different kind of styles in terms of money based on your answer to the previous question. One of you may be a saver and just feel secure only when you save and have complete control over every penny and dime in your bank account or in your pocket. And another might be more of a spender. And again, it's probably tied to what you grew up with. And the key is that, as one of the well-known marital therapists says that marriage is a people-growing machine. We grow through the conflict. Manage your expectations. Conflict about money isn't inherently a bad thing. It could be a source of growth if you learn how to hear each other and work together as a team. My father always says, couples don't have to think alike, they have to think together. They have to think together. So let me talk about this just for a minute or so. Maybe I'll do it with a story before I go on to some concluding recommendations. Dr. Steiner, what time should I be finished by?
Take your time, it's great.
But tell me anyway.
Technically speaking, soon.
Tell me exactly. It's like 10 minutes, okay. So, fine. I'll skip the story and go on to some other recommendations. You want the story? Okay, here's the story. Story from my own marriage. Okay, I've been blessed by almost 40 years of an unbelievably wonderful marriage. But like in any marriage, you're pulling together two families with two very different sensibilities. So I grew up in a home. I'm not talking about money, I'm just talking about time. But the nimshal is obvious. So I grew up in a home where time was very, very specific. Very Yekisha approach to time. My father was doing a levaya called for 11 a.m. He'd start his hesped even if the mess wasn't there yet. He was like really, to this day, very, very careful about time. Okay? He's a rabbi, by the way. Okay, that's it. I just assumed that was normal. That's what a normal family was like. I used to have a professor who would say there are two kinds of people. There are normal people and there are people I know. Okay? So not a bad way of thinking about this. Okay? So I get married to this unbelievably wonderful family. I never taught about in-laws and conflict about in-laws because it never entered my mind that you could have conflict with in-laws. And the many years that I had the success of having my in-laws being my father-in-law and mother-in-law, I never heard a critical word. They were just unbelievable people, unbelievable tzaddikim, unbelievable. But their approach to time was that it's a general impression. If something was called for 11 o'clock in the morning, they might show up at 11, they might show up at 11 at night. They had a very relaxed approach to time. So you could imagine what happened when we first got married. So the way it would show itself is, let's say, very early in my marriage, I remember our very first chasana we were invited to. So this is before computers, I was ready. I figured out in order to get to the 6:30 smorgasbord, I had to be in the car by 5:42. To me, that was normal. So at 5:42, I'm walking out to the car, and I called out to my wife. I said, by the way, I'll be waiting in the car. And she said, what? For what? So remember the wedding? She hadn't even begun to think about what she was going to wear. Now, what happened in the past almost 40 years? What happened is exactly what needed to happen. I needed to learn how to be much more relaxed about time. That's exactly what my area of growth needed to be. I needed to learn that if I come to the smorgasbord late, it's really good for me, okay? And she needed to learn to be more careful about time. So today, if you were a fly on the wall at a wedding that we're about to go to today, she's on average ready 10 minutes before me. And we both grew in the area that we needed to grow. Same thing with money. Conflict over money is inevitable. And it's up to you whether or not it becomes the source of growth or the source of conflict. Okay? Is it a masa or a masa? Is it a burden or is it a song? Let me end with a couple of basic recommendations on handling fights. Number one, Korach, right? Yesterday's Parsha. It's a famous Dvar Torah that is said about the Brisa Novos that talks about the two different kinds of conflict you could have, right? You could have one like Korach v'Adaso, or the one that we strive for like Shammai and Hillel. So the obvious question is, what's the parallel to Shammai v'Hillel? It should be Korach v'Moshe. Why is it Korach v'Adaso? Doesn't make any sense. So a number of Mefarshim give this brilliant answer. The brilliant answer is that because Korach, there was no other side. Korach v'Adaso had no ability to put themselves into the shoes of the other. And that's the first guiding principle for conflict resolution in a marriage, is you have to be able to understand that to be understood, first understand. You have to take a whole different mindset to your disagreements about money. You have to, because otherwise you're going to just keep fighting the same fight over and over and over again without resolution. By the way, the research on children's exposure to fighting finds the most damaging kind of marital conflict for kids to be exposed to. It literally tears up their neshama, is conflict between parents that they don't see being resolved. Actually, if they see parents disagreeing about something and it being respectfully resolved, it's associated with good stuff. But if they see conflict that just constantly goes on, it's poison for children. So in terms of the mindset, here's the mindset to bring to discussions about money. It's first of all, get curious. How could she do this? What's she thinking about? How could she have spent this or that? Or how could he have done this? And if you go into the disagreement with a mindset marked by calmness, marked by curiosity, and also marked by empathy. So you may find that your husband is being over-controlling in terms of money. But then if you remember, it's maybe because he grew up in a home where both parents were spending in crazy ways, and he was always worried about being thrown out of their house. And it's really the scared little boy that's making him act like this. So to the extent that you could bring empathy to your discussions, see it not as a defect, not as a sign of sickness, but as a sign of a difference. And to go into your conversations with that combination of curiosity, empathy, and respect, it's a game changer. It's just an obvious but extremely important point. We go from af to shel rosh. All the research shows when you have a fight about money and it's being driven by the primitive centers of the brain, behind your nose, which is where the rage that's akin to avodah zarah, we're told. And you go from there to the shel rosh, exactly where men we put on our shel rosh this morning, okay? Why do we obsess so much over where it is? It's because That's where the frontal prefrontal cortex, we have Dr. Steiner here, that's where control and perspective taking takes place. So we have to go from the Af to the Shel Rosh. And that's the second major point about fighting. Never get into a discussion about money when you're furious at each other. You take a step back, okay? You say to yourself, this will wait. You strike when the iron is cold. And you set up a time to discuss it, but never at that moment. There's a beautiful thought in Sefer HaChasidim. It goes like this. Acharis kitata charata. After argument, there's regret. After argument, there's regret. Isn't that always true? You don't remember the content of the fight. You just remember the bad feelings afterwards. So you have to remember, Viktor Frankl said it beautifully. He said between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our choice. In that space lies our growth. So to summarize the points are number one is the pullback response. Strike when the iron is cold. Remember Achras Katata Charata. Have a planned discussion later on where you go from the Af to the Shel Rosh. Point number two is when you finally get to the discussion, bring an air of curiosity, respect, and empathy. Don't see it as a defect, a sign that he or she is crazy. See this as a sign of a difference, which makes sense. Everybody has a different approach to this. That'll change the ability to hear the other point of view, which could lead to something constructive. And the third point is when you finally do have the calm discussion, just remember to hit the reset button. Don't drag in old fights and old complaints about how he or she did this crazy thing with their money. Most importantly, remember the importance of having these discussions, because all the research shows, and I'm sure that Morris Smith could tell you this, the most destructive thing when it comes to couples and money is secrecy. When there's secrecy about money, you're spending without telling her, you have a separate credit card that he or she doesn't know about, or you somehow are doing all kinds of things behind his or her back, when you have that, it can literally poison the marriage. And the only way to overcome secrecy is have a sense of mutual trust in your discussions. You stay focused in your discussions, don't drag in the kitchen sink, and perhaps most importantly, understand there are going to be setbacks. You may sit down and have the budget, and you may have a very good understanding of how to handle money after you've done some of the things that you've heard about today. But remember, there are going to be setbacks because that's part of life. Part of life, though, is how do you view the setbacks? If you view it as a threat, there's going to be a sense of yish. If you see it instead as a challenge, because this is one of the greatest challenges in a marriage, it could become the source of the growth that we're talking about. I can either end now or end with the final story. Okay, you got it. And then I'll sit down. Okay? More or less. I think I did in my 45 minutes. Okay. Yeah. It's a story about marital change and how hard it is, especially if you have a couple that gets involved in a fight and you're trying to make somebody into something they're not. By the way, when you are able to really negotiate and talk and understand each other, it leads very often to a mutual respect that leads to inevitable differences about money to be workable reality. First High Lifeline Retreat. Retreat for families of children. At that time, it was mostly children with cancer. It's about 25 years ago. Everybody was very nervous about whether it would work. We had the spectrum from Hasidim to people who were totally secular in a beautiful resort hotel back then. And I'm getting up to give the first psychologist talk at the first retreat. And until then, the issue hadn't really been talked about, so everybody was very nervous. And I get up behind the Stender. And right down the center aisle, a couple comes marching down. And the husband in the couple starts screaming at me. He starts screaming. He says, "You have my body here. My mind's going to be a million miles away. I'm not going to listen to a word you have to say." And he angrily rushes back to his seat. I'm thinking I could be home with my family. I don't need to be here. And I run over to him, I say, what's this about? And he says, look, he says, I'm a physician. He's a doctor. He said his son had been diagnosed about a year earlier with leukemia. And he said, I spent the last year with every waking second, not only being involved in my son's treatment in the hospital and out of the hospital, but going around the world to find the best possible treatments for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He said, I finally get away for the first time I could relax in a year. Beautiful resort hotel. There's world-renowned oncologists to take care of my son. There's counselors for my sick child and for his siblings. And I'm finally ready to relax for the first time in a year, and my wife's making me come listen to you. Okay? And she's on the side saying, make him stay, make him stay. And I tell him, look, please, just go up to your room, it's fine. It's fine, I understand where you're coming from. So he runs away, I don't see him for the rest of Shabbos. She spends the entire Shabbos and Sunday morning sitting in the last row, last seat, making daggers at me, looking at me like she wants to kill me. And I understand why. And I don't see them for 6 years. They never come back to the retreats. And I always felt a little bit badly about it. I didn't quite know what happened to them. 6 years later, it's a Friday night, and I'm at a Shabbos for families of children who went off the derech. So it's people from around the country who were suffering with the difficulty of having a kid who was raised from and is no longer from. And I get up behind the stender to give a talk on Friday night. I was one of the speakers. And the same couple comes marching down the center aisle before I could even say a word. And I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm like ducking behind the stender. So he says, he sees that I'm nervous. And he turns to me and he says, you know something? He says, I see that you're nervous. He says, I'm not coming to complain to you. He said, that Shabbos 6 years ago was a turning point in my marriage. I began to learn that my wife is not crazy and not insensitive, but she's different. She has a different way of dealing with tough times. And she loves hearing mental health people talk. It helps her. Doesn't help me, but it helps her. And she realized, I have to go into my cave. My style of dealing with stress is I need to relax once in a while. And I need to be in the problem-solving mode. And he said, the weirdest thing happened in the last 6 years. He said, thank God my son with cancer is cancer-free. The doctors think he's totally cured. He says, but my older daughter, like many siblings of children with a life-threatening illness, she started acting up. She's become quite rebellious. But he says, you know what's changed? As I accepted my wife's style, and she accepted my style, we met halfway. Do you know that he came to every session that Shabbos, and he listened and asked the best questions? What was the source of that change? Combination of empathy, acceptance, planned discussion, going from the Af to the Shel Rosh. So ultimately, may we all be zocha in dealing with this issue, which is, of course, it's going to be a source of conflict because everybody has a different approach to it. May we all be zocha to transform the masa from one of being a burden to one of being something transcendent that could be an engine for growth and ultimately the Shalom Bayis that this wonderful organization is all about. Thank you.
All right, folks. We're going to, in moments, take a break. I just wanted to say one or two last points here. First of all, I think up to now, this has been amazing. Just to share some few brief ideas. Interestingly, everyone always says, what am I doing this? I get ridiculed, run into difficulty. My wife calls me the marriage maven. One can imagine, why am I here? Well, I'll tell you, it's a lot like, honestly, I do it because I'm selfish. I want to hear what we put together, and I find that I'm definitely somebody, I always tell people, even in medicine, I said one of my strengths is that I've made more mistakes than anyone else I ever know, and you learn a lot from your mistakes. I'm the little rat who hit every side of the maze, I may not be the smartest guy, but I've certainly made more mistakes than most people, and therefore I have a little bit of experience. But I think that in marriage, I could probably say a lot of that. I think I've probably gotten yelled at and put my foot in my mouth more than once. But with respect to what I need and what I want, I can tell you this is a lot. Like I don't know what Bach felt like when he was putting a symphony together, but in terms of envisioning what I could have wanted for this, I feel like we've just finished our first, the first act or the first opening section, and this has been, for me at least, the symphony. This has been phenomenal. So I hope all of you are getting out of this somewhat what I feel that this has already come to, and we have more planned here. So thank you all for beautiful words up to now. We do have workshops planned for the rest of this morning through around 12:30 or so, and then we have a wrap up at the end for questions and answers. This is somewhat of a longer morning than most, but now the point is to try to take some of these brilliant ideas and see if we can get a little bit more personal, a little bit more hands-on, so we can try to implement them in a much more practical, pragmatic way. I would want to point out, just from a simplistic perspective, that one thing also I would just say, even with respect to interesting the number, we were hoping to have thousands of people here in throngs, but I will tell you 2 or 3 interesting ideas. One is that they say Rav Moshe always gave a little Gemara shir, I believe, a little Gemara shir. I think he said that for years and years he was giving a shir, maybe Thursday nights, and 3 or 4 people were the ones who attended. The Gadol Hador was giving a shir for 3 or 4 people. To be one of those 3 or 4 people, so you're all very fortunate to be here, but we're taping as well. I would also say, just completely derechol, I was somehow accidentally, through the experience of YouTube, ended up on one of those sites that says, the 10 greatest concerts of all time, and this was rock concerts. But I can tell you, interestingly enough, the 2 or 3 of the top were in little teeny venues that were considered the best concerts ever, that were somehow attended by 40 or 50 people. I don't know that size matters when you're making a big difference. I think that we'd like it to, but hopefully this message and with the plans of broadcasting beyond will go a lot longer than this, because there's no question that what's happening is, Baruch Hashem, very special, and the concepts we're pulling together are wonderful. So I think you're all very lucky to be at something that hopefully will be very historic, and hopefully the beginning of more spreading of this information in this integrated way. What's up and coming now are a number of workshops. We're going to be hearing from a number of the Mesila workshop directors and leaders from Lakewood, in addition to David Mark, Gottman therapist. We're going to take a very small break between now and then. I just want to remind everyone, there are sheets number 1 for surveys. We'd like everyone who shows up to at least fill out surveys regarding the different lectures and the courses we had here, just for future purposes of quality control, of making sure we do other things. We also passed along, Mesila has a booth set outside with a number of their informational packets, books, and other things to avail yourself of. We also included with this, for everyone, please, a sheet on, we're asking a suggested donation of $29 per person or $49 a couple for this event. Please give if you can. Please give lots more if you can. But in addition, on that sheet, you'll also find a number of other opportunities for both, not just sponsorship, but a number of CDs we're making available of previous lectures from Rabbi Goldwasser, Rabbi Throne, Rabbi Kurland. I'm missing at least one person here, Rabbi Kurland, Rabbi Meir Weiss, and an entire series of some 4 teleconferences given by Shai Ashraf on the Menucha Principle, which just recently literally came out with a new book, The Menucha Principle on Life. And he touches on some of those brilliant ideas in that telephone series. So these are tapes and CDs not available elsewhere. We hope to soon make those available in streaming form. Some of them are already available on YouTube if you were to check that out in sort of a broken format that at the time did like for more than about 10-15 minutes at a pop. But we're going to try providing that information more readily, but for right now those are available at a minimal cost for those interested. We don't have, I believe, the address on the forms you have, so if you could try leaving that before you leave if you're interested, or there is a phone number and email contact information that can provide you with on the way out. We're going to recoup in about 2 to 5 minutes, everyone. There's refreshments out back. Those who need babysitting, it's out there. Let's try again, shooting for between 11:15, 11:18, somewhere in that range. Thank you all again for coming. Any questions, let us know. Thank you.